It's Ty Learned, and today I wanted to start a video series. Now, you're probably going to hear this in a couple of videos that I talk about this because I've already kind of started the series, but I figured why not start it off with a character that's pretty relevant right now in terms of the current stuff that's going on in One Piece, that being Kizaru. Before we get into Kizaru scaling, I should explain to some of you what a fraud is, or what the term fraud means in the One Piece community, or in the anime community, I guess. A character being on Fraud Watch essentially means that they are overhyped and overrated. In this series, we will be determining if a character is or isn't a fraud by going over all of their feats and having the best interpretation I can for said feats. And with that being said, let's just get straight up into it. Kizaru's done like 3 things in the entire series, so there's not too much to talk about, but those 3 things in specific, I feel like a lot of people have different interpretations of the feats, so I will be doing my best to basically say, yeah, you're wrong. So let's get into it. Now we'll start off in the Sabaody arc where Kizaru is introduced. Kizaru would body slam the worst generation along with uppercutting the Straw Hats, forcing Rayleigh to intercept and engage in a fight with him. Now, I feel like a lot of people have 2 different interpretations to the fight. 1, Rayleigh is stronger than Kizaru. 2, Kizaru is stronger than Rayleigh. Now, for the one that I believe, personally, I'm gonna go with the second option, and the reason for this is because Kizaru doesn't use any of his like crazy abilities on Sabaody. If he straight up wanted to, he could just fly up and nuke the whole island, and I don't know what Rayleigh does to that, if I'm being real. But even in their confrontation, Rayleigh is straight up sweating and is implied to be losing from Luffy's POV. Now, you could just jot this up to stamina and say beforehand they are just even, and the only reason he loses is because of a stamina problem. But Kizaru, at least in my opinion, never really looked as pressed as Rayleigh did during their encounter. And like I said, he doesn't do the main thing he does, which is shoot laser beams. He's engaging with him in a sword fight, at least in my opinion, coming off like a troll, and he's still in there against Rayleigh. So regarding Sabaody, I feel like it's clear that the strongest character in that arc was Kizaru, and old Rayleigh is not above Kizaru and at best is relatively below him. Now let's get into Marineford, where Kizaru, along with the other admirals that he's fighting alongside with, are holding back. This is because they don't want to destroy the Marineford island, and it's just kind of a One Piece thing where if an admiral is fighting in a place with people or civilians, they're just not going to be fighting at their fullest because they're trying to protect the people, not commit mass genocide. So already going into Marineford, we know that Kizaru is not at his best. And so this brings us to his one-on-one encounter with Marco, where a lot of people like to bring up this data book of Marco being equal to the admirals, and referring to his fight with Kizaru, Marco being a character who can't even beat King and Queen by himself, which is essentially the recipe for Kizaru being a fraud. However, I disagree with this data book completely. There is a different interpretation to this statement, like you can just take it verbatim, like Marco equals admirals, but the other one is that, I mean, an equal exchange can be like a character throws a punch and then, you know, Marco throws a punch, which technically in that sense, Marco was in there with the admirals. You know, Aokiji is gonna stab Luffy, he intercepts. Akainu throws a punch, Marco blocks, you know what I mean? And even in the fight with Kizaru, Marco lands that kick on him and does absolutely 0 damage. And then the moment Marco turns off his double fruit, Marco just gets pooped on, so like, who really cares? I've also seen the argument of Marco not using named attacks at Marineford, so he's holding back. Yeah, narratively, this makes absolutely no sense, and you would have to quantify how much stronger Marco's named attacks are, which you can't. Point is, I feel like it's easier to say Kizaru over Marco than to say that Marco scales to the admirals, because I feel like that's just a little disingenuous, especially with the fact that the only reason he's surviving is purely because of his devil fruit. And then later on in the arc, Whitebeard tries to stop Kizaru himself, which Kizaru just straight up forms around his blade and just shoots him in the chest. Yes, this Whitebeard is weakened, however, this is the weakened Whitebeard that's fighting the admirals, which would solidify at least Kizaru not just getting straight up one-shot by the other admirals. They all should be somewhat in a similar tier to one another, with the exception of maybe current Aokiji and Akainu, due to them may or may not becoming way stronger after their fight. By the way, I'm sorry if I keep saying, oh, you can make this argument. There's just a lot of like little chicken nugget arguments when it comes to Marineford scaling, and especially when talking about the admirals. But overall, I feel like the best interpretation to have coming out of this arc is that Kizaru took absolutely 0 damage, and when he was fighting Marco, he was big chilling and was not getting pressed. especially when given the fact that he kind of finessed old Whitebeard on his own and is stated to be the fastest of the 3 admirals at Marineford, who also proceed to finagle Old Beard. Meaning Kizaru is not a fraud at Marineford, and the people who unironically think Marco is beating him I'm gonna beat you. Another argument I see regarding Kizaru at Marineford being a fraud is when Ben Beckman intercepts him, but people just like to forget the next panel right after, which is Kizaru not caring about him and then shooting his attack anyway and Ben sweating. And him being below Ben, in my opinion, doesn't make him a fraud because Ben unironically has statements of being relative to Shanks and consistently is feared by the admirals. I can see where the Yonko commander level Kizaru arguments are coming from, but I mean, Ben and Marco for one are just not on the same level of power. They're both Yonko commanders, but Ben would dunk on Marco. And I feel like this speaks better for Ben than it does worse for Kizaru. Does that make sense? I think that makes sense. And now let's get into what we've... My god, this is so sad. What we've recently seen in Film Red, which is Kizaru getting speed blitzed by Shanks. This looks pretty bad for Kizaru since the Yonkos are considered to be relative to one another, meaning if Shanks could do this, it's more than likely the other Yonkos can. But unlike the admirals at Marineford, I feel like there is somewhat of a hierarchy for the Yonkos. Like we see Kaido calling Big Mom pathetic, and we have the likes of Shanks being able to stop Kaido at Marineford. But the point I'm trying to get across is if any of the Yonko try fighting another Yonko, it's going to be more than likely a high diff fight. But yeah, guys, this kind of looks really bad for Kizaru, I can't hold you. It also makes him look stupider when earlier in the manga he was like, oh, Akainu, can I go fight Big Mom and Kaido? Like, bro would have gotten his head stomped in if he did that. And we know currently on Egghead, he's not trying to, like, destroy things. He's trying to capture the Straw Hats. So, more than likely, he's also holding back here, but we don't know just yet. Before we come to the conclusion on if Kizaru is or isn't a fraud, let's do a little chicken nugget overview. In Sabaody, he did a little couple saber clashes with Rayleigh and had him sweating. In Marineford, not a single significant attack or sign of damage was done to Kizaru. At the very worst, Marco kicked him down a rock, which he immediately got up in the same panel that he got kicked in. And right after Kizaru is quote-unquote fearing his life for Ben, he just shoots down at Ben. And in Film Red, he kind of got beat up. There's really no excuse to this, I can't lie. But I feel like Shanks beating up Kizaru doesn't mean anything too bad because the main thing that puts Kizaru on Fraud Watch in the first place is, oh my god, he's Yonko commander level, which I already debunked. In conclusion, Kizaru is not a fraud. If you think he's a fraud, fuck you. I'm just kidding. And let me know down in the comments who I should cover next on Fraud Watch. Okay, goodbye. Stop watching the video.